Just how far down the rabbit hole does Skyrim's lore go? And just how dark can it get? Midnight? Pitch? Blacker than the foulest witch? If you answered yes to all of those, you'd be correct, as today we're going to take a look at the lore in Skyrim surrounding vampires. Their history is one of violence of all kinds, so consider this as a bit of a warning before we jump headlong into the abyss. Ready? Let's begin. Our trip through history begins in the 4th era, present-day Skyrim. The last Dragonborn's journey sees them take on many an obstacle and foe alike, ranging from man, mer, dragon, and every monster imaginable in between. Encounters with the undead in these lands are not uncommon, as many ancient sites and tombs alike are haunted with the unrestful spirits of skeletal remains and the zombie-like Draugr. Necromancy is all too common across the country. Frankly, even the Dragonborn themselves could be seen in such a capacity if a commoner were to see them draining the soul away from one of the legendary creatures. With all that being said, perhaps the most dangerous being in the ranks of the undead is the vampire. Vampires are somewhat unique among those of undeath, as they still maintain higher brain function and are not a puppet to be strung about by some common necromancer unearthing some random grave. There are a few other types that share in this aspect, such as a lich, but vampires exist in far greater numbers than those relatively solitary beings. Vampires are also of particular danger, due to their ability to spread their curse to anyone they attempt to prey upon. Sometimes, this can lead to a somewhat cruel twist of fate, as the Dragonborn learns when reading from the book Immortal Blood. Sometimes, the hunter can become the very thing they sought to destroy. An excerpt pertaining to Skyrim reads, "The moons and stars were hidden from sight, making that particular quiet night especially dark. The town guard had to carry torches to make their rounds, but the man who came to call at my chapel carried no light with him. I came to learn that Movarth Pakin could see in the dark almost as well as the light, an excellent talent considering his interests were exclusively nocturnal. One of my acolytes brought him to me, and from the look of him, I at first thought he was in need of healing. He was pale to the point of opalescence, with a face that looked like it had once been very handsome before some unspeakable suffering. The dark circles under his eyes bespoke exhaustion, but the eyes themselves were alert. Intense, almost insane. He quickly dismissed my notion that he himself was ill, though he did want to discuss a specific disease. Vampirism, he said, and then paused at my quizzical look. I was told that you were someone I should seek out for help understanding it. Who told you that? I asked, with a smile. Tessina Gray. I immediately remembered her. A brave, beautiful knight who had needed my assistance separating fact from fiction on the subject of the vampire. It had been 2 years, and I had never heard whether my advice had proved effective. You've spoken to her. How is her ladyship? I asked. Dead, Movarth replied coldly, and then, responding to my shock, he added to perhaps soften the blow. She said your advice was invaluable, at least for the one vampire. When last I talked to her, she was tracking another. It killed her. Then the advice I gave her was not enough, I sighed. Why do you think it would be enough for you? I was a teacher once myself, years ago, he said. Not in a university, a trainer, in the Fighters Guild. But I know that if a student doesn't ask the right questions, the teacher cannot be responsible for his failure. I intend to ask you the right questions. And that he did. For hours he asked questions and I answered what I could, but he never volunteered any information about himself. He never smiled. He only studied me with those intense eyes of his, committing every word I said to memory. Finally, I turned the questioning around. You said you were a trainer at the Fighters Guild. Are you on an assignment for them? No, he said curtly, and finally I could detect some weariness in those feverish eyes of his. I would like to continue this tomorrow night if I could. I need to get some sleep and absorb this. You sleep during the day, I smiled. To my surprise, he returned the smile, though it was more of a grimace. When tracking your prey, you adapt their habits. The next day, he did return with more questions. These ones very specific. He wanted to know about the vampires of Eastern Skyrim. I told him about the most powerful tribe, the Volkihar clan, paranoid and cruel, whose very breath could freeze their victims' blood in the veins. I explained to him how they lived beneath the ice of remote and haunted lakes, never venturing into the world of men except to feed. Movarth Pakin listened carefully and asked more questions into the night, until at last he was ready to leave. "I will not see you for a few days," he said, "but I will return and tell you how helpful your information has been." True to his word, the man returned to my chapel shortly after midnight 4 days later. There was a fresh scar on his cheek, but he was smiling that grim and satisfied smile of his. "Your advice helped me very much," he said, "but you should know that the Volkihar have an additional ability you didn't mention. They can reach through the ice of their lakes without breaking it. It was quite a nasty surprise, being grabbed from below without any warning." "How remarkable," I said with a laugh. "And terrifying. You're lucky you survived." "I don't believe in luck. I believe in knowledge and training. Your information helped me, and my skill at melee combat sealed the Bloodsucker's fate. I've never believed in weaponry of any kind. Too many unknowns. Even the best swordsmith has created a flawed blade, but you know what your body is capable of. I know I can land 1,000 blows without losing my balance, provided I get the first strike." "The first strike," I murmured. "So, you must never be surprised." If that line there isn't foreshadowing, then I don't know what is. Movarth goes on to hunt down vampiric tribes across Tamriel using the knowledge this priest provided him with, until one day he inquires about the Cyrodiil Vampirum Order. Secretive and difficult to suss out, Movarth ultimately failed in locating one, at least on his own terms. Upon returning to the priest, it is revealed that they themselves are a vampire, and although it's not outright confirmed, the structure of the story would seem to imply that they're of this secretive order. This, however, seems to not be the case, as we can see in-game. If we strike Movarth with a weapon imbued with ice, we find that he's of Volkihar blood, which would mean that the priest was as well. The priest feeds on Movarth, and he is ultimately turned into a vampire himself. This all comes to a head within the quest Laid to Rest within the area of Morthal. Cunningly, Movarth sets a plan in motion to convert the settlement into a consistent source of food for himself. Alva, a woman he turned, slowly seduced the town's guard one by one and turned them, with the plan to ultimately use the townsfolk as livestock. Morthal would become a farm. That is, of course, until the Dovahkiin showed up and dismantled his coven, fang by fang. Movarth may have been a vampire master, but unfortunately, Khajiit seeks wares that he may sell for coin, so... Movarth's tale is important to our discussion, as Immortal Blood may be the first time the Dovahkiin, the player, encounters a mention of the Volkihar clan of Skyrim, one of two groups central to the Dawnguard storyline. Movarth would be considered peasantry in the eyes of these vampires, or at least the vampire lords at the head of the clan. The fangs that Movarth hunted down were not pure blood like those who sit at the table of Castle Volkihar. While vampirism is easily spread, those near the point of origin or of pure blood consider themselves to be above the rest. And for good reason, as they are considerably more powerful. Lord Harkon, the vampire lord seated at the top of the clan, was formerly a ruler in the early eras of Skyrim who was obsessed with achieving immortality, as he feared losing his power above all else. Harkon, already a cruel ruler by any standard, crossed the line and became an absolute monster in his quest to cheat death. In pursuing a path of dark arts and rituals, he began to worship the Daedric lord of domination and enslavement, Molag Bal. In order to please the god of brutality and be blessed with vampirism, he sacrificed 1,000 innocent people to the Daedric lord. Darker and, frankly, more sickening still, is what he put his wife and daughter through to achieve the same thing for themselves. To fully explain this, we should take a moment to go back even further in time. Further back still through the Merethic era when Tamriel and the world of Nirn itself was still young. Back to when the first vampire was born. Lamé Beofog was a priestess of Arkay who lived during the Merethic era, a member of the now all but extinct Nedic race. Her tale is forever marked upon Skyrim by Shriekwind Bastion, named as such because of her screams. Perhaps the best way to look at her unfortunate, grim story is to open the pages of the book Opusculus LeMay Ball. I'll offer a warning here since, as the title of this video indicated, this story gets dark and uncomfortable at best. What is described in these pages is nothing less than complete, pure evil. The papyrus reads, "A brief account of LeMay Ball and the restless death. Mabe Ewanil, scribe. Translation by University of Guilin Press. 3rd Era, 105. As brighter grows light, darker becomes shadow. So it passed that the Daedra Molag Bal looked on Arkay and thought the Aedra prideful of his dominion o'er the death of man and Mer, and it was sooth. Bal, whose fear is the wanton oppression and entrapment of mortal souls, sought to thwart Arkay, who knew that not man, nor Mer, nor beastfolk of all Nirn could escape eventual death. The Aedra was doubtless of his sphere, and so Molag Bal set upon Nirn to best death. Tamriel was still young and filled with danger and wondrous magic when Bal walked in the aspect of a man and took a virgin, LeMay Beelfog, from the Nedic peoples. Savage and loveless, Bal profaned her body, and her screams became the shrieking winds, which still haunt certain winding fjords of Skyrim. Shedding a lone droplet of blood on her brow, Bal left Nirn, having sown his wrath. Violated and comatose, LeMay was found by nomads and cared for. A fortnight hence, the nomad weird woman enshrouded LeMay in pall, for she had passed into death. In their way, the nomads built a bonfire to immolate the husk. That night, LeMay rose from her funeral pyre and set upon the coven, still aflame. She ripped the throats of the women, ate the eyes of the children, and profaned their men as cruelly as Bal had ravished her. And so LeMay, who is known to us as Blood Matron, imprecated her foul aspect upon the folk of Tamriel, and begat a brood of countless abominations, from which came the vampires, most cunning of the night horrors. And so was the scourge of undeath wrought upon Tamriel, cruelly mocking Arkay's rhythm of life and death through all the coming eras of the Ettada, and for all his sadness, Arkay knew this could not be undone. Unspeakable is the word I'd use to describe these events. Equally horrifying is how she wrought the same type of punishment upon others when waking in her state of confused madness. LeMay, known in later eras by many names, was the first vampire and the progenitor, or, in cases like Lord Harkon, the example which to strive towards. One of her titles, First Daughter of Cold Harbor, notes her intimate connection with the lord of that particular realm of oblivion, Molag Bal, and set a precedent going forward for all those who worshipped him. Lord Harkon achieved his vampiric being through the sacrifice of others which included his wife Valerica and even his daughter Serana. Frankly, it's a bit vague whether they were initially willing to go along with the ritual, though I'd err on the side of that not quite being the case, simply from Serana's complete discomfort around the subject when asked. You see, while Harkon sacrificed others to gain power, they had to sacrifice themselves and offer their entire being to Molag Bal, thus being subjected to the same manner of horror that he brought upon LeMay. Honestly, Harkon is an irredeemable monster who deserved every ounce of punishment brought down upon him by the Dovahki. His plot to darken the land in an endless night aside, his actions against his people and own family were unforgivable. Plus, he was full of himself. He may be a vampire lord, but unfortunately, he isn't the High King of Skyrim. So, putting all this dark history aside for a moment, it's interesting to consider just how vampirism actually spreads from those that were initially turned. The curse spreads as a disease, and not just by one. There are so far known to be 3. Harkon and his brood all have what is known as sanguinaire vampirus, which is a common pathway to becoming a vampire, along with another disease known as porphyric hemophilia, which is spread through Morrowind and Cyrodiil. There is another, however, to which these diseases are quote-unquote inferior. Unlike vampires from these broods, those who have descended directly from the first vampire, LeMay, are afflicted with noxophilic sanguivoria and are effectively daywalkers. That is to say that they are not weakened by sunlight, and in fact gain more strength as the sun sets. It probably isn't just coincidence that this is a benefit attached to being related to the first of their kind. Even in works outside of Elder Scrolls, Dracula and his kin are typically more powerful than other vampires that crop up across the land. It's not entirely clear, but perhaps this all originated from the very specific mention of Molag Bal leaving a bit of his blood upon LeMay, whereas it's unknown if he did the same with his actual worshippers. All in all, when digging into the lore for these beings, I wasn't expecting it to go to the places it did. I brought up Dracula, and in more recent works, outside of Elder Scrolls such as Dracula Untold, Vlad Tepes III becomes a vampire through Caligula, the first vampire in that lore, who made a deal with a demon, possibly the devil themselves. The power was born through drinking this demon's blood. I initially figured the Elder Scrolls would go in a similar direction, which it did with Molag Bal, but they took it to an even darker place. Honestly, it surprised me, and I'd like to know how it struck you too. Whether this is the first time you've heard of it, or if you're a seasoned Elder Scrolls veteran. Let me know your opinion on this dark history in the comments below. I look forward to seeing your thoughts. While you're there, leave a like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video and want to see more like it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you real soon, right here on ShieldScuff. Peace.